Hi, I'm doing my check-in video for Clearing the Plains. This is for Chapter 8, Dominion Administration of Relief from 1883 to 1885. Uh, so we're on the plains. All the treaties have been basically set. All the settlement of Native peoples on the reserves is virtually complete through a kind of a policy of starvation. It's like you want to get food. We only give you food if you get to the thing, to the reserves. The police are brought under a tighter control by the conservative administration. This is kind of the turning point, as Duck says. This is when the police are brought under control of the Department of Indian Affairs. So they stop being viewed by the native peoples as perhaps like saviors, to becoming ambivalent agents of their subjugation. They're a enforcement squad for the Department of Indian Affairs. And this is all against the backdrop of the construction of the CPR, bringing the railway across Canada, bringing all the settlers across Canada, and indeed a lot of the government's decisions on these matters seems to be heavily influenced by that. Now there's the whole thing of the business of food supply, of bringing food to the much needed food supply to the prairies, and this is big business. It goes in 1880 to 1882. It goes from 157,572 to 607,235. So the food relief jumps then, but then you get by like 1882 to 85. The Department of Indian Affairs expenses in Manitoba and Northwest Territories exceeds $1 million annually. And a big hunk of this is through the contracts that get awarded. And one of the big companies that ends up getting these contracts is I.G. Baker and Company, a U.S. company based in Fort Benton, which we know from kind of the whoop up trade. It's basically that closest thing from on the Missouri that you can get goods to, that you can then ship up to the prairies. And indeed, that seems to be why they were so successful and were able to actually transport so much goods. Is they bought stuff in Montreal, and then brought it down through the states through a much more dependable waterway series, the Missouri and stuff like that, and were able to actually get it across. So they're cheaper. They had apparently good political kind of maneuverings in both Washington and Ottawa, and we'll see those connections through the chief commissioner, Dewdney. It's Edward Dewdney. Through the thing, they basically outcompete the HBC, who had been used to kind of giving kind of supplies to like small fur traders. And the HBC is using very not really reliable Canadian waters, and you get perishable food stuck. And the demand was so great for food that even Baker struggles to meet it throughout the thing. God, I'm not going to go this detailed through all these many notes I made. But we also just have the thing of these food stockpiles are rotting in warehouses at the same time, while the native peoples were starving. They were, it's like John A. Macdonald is he's getting criticized by the liberals of you're spending too much money feeding the natives. There's very much this thing of they must be lazy, this super racist stuff. It's like, oh no, we're going to be super strict. We're going to be there's going to be lots of regulations placed on the distribution of food. You're going to have to it's going to be a work for food rations policy. And it's the minimum to save life, which is ignoring or overlooking the idea of malnutrition and how that is going to further increase kind of the things of TB and other diseases just ravaging the populations. They also bring out a kind of a native farming, educating native farmers for thing, but this seems to be much more of a fig leaf for voters, as we kind of see in this chapter. There doesn't seem to be any expectation that this is actually going to work. As a result, they have like these farm instructors and Indian agents who don't really have to be responsible for like any results. Apparently, you get the kind of the shittiest candidates, the shittiest people being in these positions and really abusing their power in a lot of cases, which causes much violence later. There seems to be like, but the opposition is like, most serious charges, you're spending too much money, and the PM promises to be even more stingy, and this is happening apparently even before there was the big financial crisis and economic downturn in 1883. They actually start slashing earlier than that. One of the big figures in all this kind of fiscal restraint stuff is a fellow named Lawrence Van Cocknet, who has family connections to the PM, to John A. Macdonald, and is there really for extreme food cuts in food rations, and he indeed seems to be in charge of. They centralize things in Ottawa. He's not really interested in actually seeing what's happening on the ground. He's a bean counter, and he's only interested in chopping those numbers, getting those numbers down. Numbers, not actual starving people, children, dying. And you really get the sense of the whole thing through here of like, John A. Macdonald is like, I'm getting super criticized, so he tells Edward Dewdney, his commissioner of this Northwest Territories, is like, he wants a full and favorable report on the progress of the Indian settlement. I want a good news report. I want the facts that are useful for me politically. I don't want the actual facts. And Dewdney supplies him with that, but he also Dewdney does seem to actually resist the most harsh measures in the bill. Now we'll get into it, but Dewdney's got a really conflicting thing. There is, however, a power struggle between Dewdney and Van Cocknet. Van Cocknet is controlling the purse. He does actually come up with a bunch of reports of waste, of how it seems like there is indeed a manipulation and connivance between the Indian agents and I.G. Baker to basically kind of milk the government milk the money for money. There are serious hints throughout this section that Dewdney is financially tied to I.G. Baker, that there's corruption. So, Dewdney is not clean in this. He's not like, oh, you can't do this to the native peoples. He does seem to be trying to, in every bit of this, the part of what he controls, to also try and line his own pockets throughout all this. And this is in the context of cases of like stuff like Flower killing like kills 20 over a 6-week period, and the blood reserve, the Kenai thing. I.G. Baker ends up paying like a fine of like $2,500. The whistleblower of it seems to get hounded by Commissioner Dewdney for inefficiency after this until he finally leaves the thing. There is double billing that gets like, basically it seems like an Indian agent charges for the same meat twice on the same day for, significant things. Now the critics are crying fraud from the Canadian government natives. But the PM is sort of like, it can't be considered a fraud. It cannot be considered a fraud on the Indians because they were living on Dominion charity. And as the old adage says, beggars should not be choosers. Indeed, this is the whole thing of the natives. It's not like we've entered into an agreement with them, and a part of that agreement is we're actually going to support them through financial hardships because they are, ceding land or anything like that, and they're going to reserves. It's like, no, they are lazy. They are going on reserves where there's not, we're not actually properly giving them the tools, the actual modern tools to do farming or anything like that. We get a thing of Piaput's band, Assiniboine, where rancid bacon kills 130, and Dewdney's kind of answer to when they say, oh, do we want fresh meat, which probably has its own issues, is the Indians should eat the bacon or die, and be damned to them. And he is Dudney in this case is accused of being a kind of a friend of the guy who supplied the bacon, which seems to have been bought on the super cheap in the States and then shipped up to Canada for a profit. So Dudney has a 2-month leave where at this point Vanderkotnet takes over, and there's restraints happen without Dudney there to actually kind of mitigate stuff. It increases the confrontation and heightens the tensions. There's a Piaput band, Piaput's band. I think it's like is it the Cree or is it the I don't have it here, but the Piaput band, they abandoned the reserve, which the government of Canada really does not like. That is a security threat. We need to keep them confined on the reserves. The police intercept them. Bloodshed is averted, and they're temporarily returned to Indian Head. There's another band. There's an Indian band, the Sakamea, that they just cut off rations altogether, and not surprisingly, they end up the band people led by Sakame break into a storehouse and steal food because they are starving, and they get charged with larceny. But in the end, the courts actually have to go with they're starving to death, and the charges do get dropped. Now Dudney does come back. They wrestle away that central control of kind of Ottawa control from Vanderkoof. Most of the supplies going to the band that might cause. And now it's interesting that most of these supplies, that actually all the food that is going, seem to be going to, the majority are going to actually the bands where, these are the ones that might actually still cause trouble for the railway. So if we're gonna give food out, we're giving it to the ones that are gonna cause trouble for us, for the railway, for the settlement of Canada. That is where the government priorities are, not in these are the most needy or anything like that. But I mean, even the ones that are getting the most rations are super meager. Now we get the whole thing of like Battleford, where basically they refuse to provide food, and that we end up with open conflict, open rebellion here. It's with the Cree, and it's like, in the super irony of things, it's like sacks of grain that are kind of withheld from the hungry are used to fortify the police positions, which has got to be the most just horrible thing. But I mean, they talk about kind of there's teachers there talking about the kind of the horrible conditions of like the winter of 1883, 1884, where the kids are starving to death, are clothed in rags in the middle of Canadian winter. And there's teacher Jefferson, who's like, he looks at the situation, he sees what the government doing, and it's like he's seeing like the natives are, basically only to be kept quiet till the country is filled up, when his ill will will be ignored, which I think sums up basically the Canadian government's dealings with natives. It's like, we're basically going to keep them as quiet as possible, as neutralized as possible, so we can get our settlers in here. There's a thing of like, maybe we should actually kind of shift them to kind of a fishing economy, but it's like, no, there's white settlers who are coming in to do commercial fishing, and we're not going to allow native peoples to actually be a part of that economy. We're not going to allow them to be a part of the agricultural economy. We're not going to allow a part of them to be a part of a fishing economy either. No. And there's all this kind of just rampant corruption. There's the comptroller of the Northwest Mounted Police, Fred White, who warns Dudney in a letter that Dudney had pecuniary interests in everything over which you have control. Like, you're going to get criticized for this in Parliament. This is the thing. But it's like the Conservatives are going to hold. They hold control for like over a decade here, so they're basically unchallenged. They might get criticized, but nothing ever happens of it. It's not something that's going to bring. It seems it brings down the government. And just the whole thing of when violence does erupt, it's notable that it is that it gets focused on a lot of these farm instructors, on a lot of these Indian agents who are, you seem to have attracted just kind of the worst of the worst, the people who are willing to enforce the most sadistic and tight regulations, who are willing to use their power to abuse the native populations, to abuse the native women in these populations, the amount of venereal disease that seems to be kind of prevalent in the employees. It's these are the people who end up getting targeted. Frog Lake, other areas which they get the thing. Now that it all erupts, they get put down, and we have the battlefield trials, the Poundmaker Cree, which they're taken. They don't get very much in the way of legal counsel, and they are and then we have the largest Poundmaker is executed, along with the kind of the leadership. And it's the largest execution in Canadian history, I guess, up to this point. And Dewdney very much says wants this to be a public spectacle. They enforce that all the surrounding natives in the reserves have to come and watch this. They are left up there, left hanging for 15 minutes, and it's a way of it's to crush them. And indeed, they crush their leadership. It's this is it. This is it. The railway is complete. The economy is transitioning from, it's transitioned from fur trade, from bison, to the agricultural economy. And most of the indigenous population is completely excluded from this. And what's about to happen is that as Dastruck says, is the Aboriginal population is going to decline to its nadir. And that's chapter 9, which is coming up next, the final chapter and conclusion, the nadir of the Indigenous Health, 1886 to 91, where I'm not surprised that under such a corrupt and callous and miserly system, that this is what's going to be the result of I think if I'm going to distinguish this from what's come before it. There's been a lot of this where the chapters before, we've had a lot about kind of like, it's been the collision of European biology, of European diseases coming to not the New World, to North America and South America, where it's just run rampant. And I don't find that as it's terrible, but with the science at the time, just with the kind of the logistics, I don't see exactly how that would have been prevented. And then I can contrast that to the last couple of chapters we've had, where it's been my government, and how they managed this situation, is very much a man-made, Canadian-made situation, Canadian white European settler situation, of how they have created this situation to maximize the worst outcomes that could have happened, and finding that really, 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 really reprehensible, really, really terrible, which is, I guess, where I'm at the moment. And I guess it's like, this is the point where the Canadian government is actually still paying attention to them, because they don't want them to get in the way. But as that teacher said, now it's going to be like, oh, we've gotten you pushed off, we've gotten the settlers in, now we're just going to really ignore you. And it's just kind of the coldness. There is that whole thing of how they're treating the native population, of like, you want charity. It's like, it's not. That is how it's getting viewed by the Liberals and the Conservatives. So this is the Canadian peoples, the representatives of the Canadian European settler peoples, saying that this is you're being lazy by starving to death. Even though that we entered into these agreements with you, yeah, we're gonna interpret that in the most miserly. You are lazy. This is charity. You beggars can't be choosers. You are beggars to us now. It's like, yeah, yeah. And it's taken so much time in courts to get to where we are today, which we're still treating the native populations like they're beggars, versus what agreements that we have entered into them and have failed to honor at every turn, which is just like it's really disgusting. Yeah, yeah. And this is a very prosperous, rich, wealthy country, and it's wealth that was taken from the peoples who were here, who should have been included in the new economy, but that's not how it happened. That's the racist, outside, how we viewed native peoples in this country, to say, yeah, no, we're taking it all. We're taking it all. Screw you guys. We're pushing you off into nowhere land to die. And we hope it's got to be an obvious, like, we're just hoping you're going to die. And indeed, well, oh God, we haven't even got into kill the Indian and the residential schools, which I don't even know if that happened. We'll see if that birth happens in these sections. I know John A. Macdonald is kind of does participate in that. Whether that gets covered in this book or not, I guess we'll see. All right, I'm rambling. I will stop here.